welcome to this virtual meeting here in Dudley Council. The proceedings will take place live on the internet and will be recorded for further viewing. It will assist the conduct of this meeting if participants speak only when invited. Can I firstly ask everyone to mute their microphones and turn off their video lead? Members of the public are welcome to view the proceedings, but should not in any way contribute to this meeting. Please remember to unmute your microphone and switch on your video feed when it is your turn to speak. Speak clearly and slowly into your microphone. Members wishing to speak should indicate using the Raise Your Hand button on the Microsoft Teams. If you do not have that, please indicate using the chat facility. I will invite members to speak at the appropriate time. I ask for everyone's patience with the use of this technology and apologise in advance if we experience any unforeseen difficulties, which we shall try to resolve as quickly as possible. Can I invite members to join me in opening this meeting by saying the Lord's Prayer in the traditional words. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
As it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread,
and
and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, ever and ever. Amen.
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 Apologies for absent. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do have Councillor Gay Partridge.
Is there any more? Nope. Declarations of interest. Any prior declarations of interest made under the Members' Code of Conduct have been published online. Interest previously disclosed at meetings are recorded in the minutes in the White Book, which is also published online. All of those interests will be taken as read. They will be deemed as repeated at this council meeting. I now invite members to declare any additional interests.
No interest whatsoever, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Will Ward. Councillor Zarda.
Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
I certainly can, Councillor Zarda.
Just in my usual way, I do like to over-declare, and I'd like to declare any matters related to health in my role as Deputy Chief Operating Officer of Russell's Hall Hospital. So any matters relating to health, public health, or any issues health related.
That's noted. Thank you very much, Councillor Zarda. Councillor Evans, can you mute your on the screen for the vision, please? You've done the sound, but just the vision, the camera one, please. Minutes. I move the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of July 2020 be confirmed as a correct record and signed. Does Council agree?
Aye.
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 Right.
Yes,
Aye.
Thank you, Councillor Evans, and thank you. That is carried. Mayor's announcements. First of all, I noticed we got Councillor Mrs. Aston with us. Can I just say how pleased I am to see you? Glad you're back out of hospital. And can I wish you personally, as I have done to your son earlier on, a speedy recovery and back to normal health as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome, Councillor Ashton. Given the current circumstances, we are unable to hold our usual programme events. However, on the 5th of November at 8 o'clock, we are hosting an aerial fireworks and lighting display to say thank you to the NHS key workers and the community. People will be able to view this in safety event from their front gardens or street. There are 6 locations in the borough where this will be taking place. So hopefully every resident of the borough will be able to see the display. Also on the Black Country Radio at that particular time, they will be playing a suitable music to accompany the firework display. So when you're watching it, you'll need to tune in to the Black Country Radio at that particular time and listen to the music which accompanies the firework display. If there is any problems there, I'm sure that if you get in touch with us, we shall be able to answer any questions that you may have relating to that matter. Remembrance Sunday is on the 8th of November and Armistice Day is on the 11th of November. Following government guidance and COVID-19 restrictions, a small wreath laying service will take place with invited guests only. Further communications will be sent out to all members in due course. Following the Appointments Committee in August, I am pleased to report that Paul Davis has now taken up his duties as Director of Housing and Community Services. I am sure the Council will join me in wishing Paul every success in this role.
Yes.
Report and recommendations. Capital Programme Monitoring. I call upon the leader, Councillor Harley, to move the
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
To move the recommendations of the Cabinet to be approved and adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the Council, I move that the recommendations of the Cabinet be approved and adopted.
I now call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Mr. Mayor, formally seconded.
Thank you. That is carried. I call upon Councillor Ken Finch, who has indicated in writing that he wishes to raise an issue on this item. Call upon Councillor Ken Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Capital Programme Monitoring, page 8, page 3, section 8 of the programme mentioned the much needed repairs to the Matterland Road Children's Home. While no one questions the need for repairs, I would like to seek a clarification around the use of the SEN and Disability Grant. You will be aware that the official guidelines from the government regarding this grant makes it specially clear it cannot be used to provide maintenance work such as this. My colleague Councillor Ridney has twice raised the issue of these matters, these grants used as, and again we ask the same question: what is the justification for the use of this? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Finch. Now call upon Councillor Shaukat Ali.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is in relation to page 8, Lister Road Depot redevelopment. Can you please let me know where we are with things in relation to re-evaluation of this project and the development of alternative plans, and when will the ward councillors be informed of these plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Councillor Bayton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is in relation to the interchange. And I'm looking for reassurance that, as referenced in the Dudley Town Centre Delivery and Investment Plan, that funding for the interchange based on the current design is secured. It only needs to be a simple yes to that question, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bayton. Councillor Ridney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to back up my colleague, Councillor Finch, in what he brought in the matters he brought up concerning paragraph 8, the Maitland Road Children's Home. While he said we do not argue with the improvements that need to be made to that, he has raised an important point that I raised way back in March as to why we were using special needs capital. Special needs and disabilities capital grant balances to fund other projects other than special needs. He came to me with this, and noting that it was raised at last council, I raised it at cabinet and the previous cabinet. So I think an explanation is required of this. Why are we using what he rightly said is ring fence money for special needs? Why are we using it, albeit for worthy projects? And I'm not arguing with the project Maitland Road, and in the previous council meeting it was done to mark improvements at one of the family centres. But how are we getting round the fact that it was designated special needs money? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ridney. Councillor Ahmed. Khurshid Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is on page 11, low carbon place strategy. Council has been awarded 2.5 million from European Regional Development Fund, and 2.5 million would be the additional from the HRA as a match funding. Total of 5 million. Apparently, Lark Fleet are appointed to deliver a program of energy efficiency and appears to have completed an initial appraisal of energy saving opportunities at all phase 1 buildings. My question is, can you confirm, or can the leader confirm, which buildings are included in phase 1? And are you able to also confirm what opportunities have been found to save energy in the phase 1 buildings, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Shakespeare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was just in response to Councillor Ali's comment about Lister Road. Obviously, the primary aim is to bring together 3 teams within public realm. Creative cost efficiencies by removing the requirement to rent depot space, and improve working conditions, including those members of staff that are decanted from the lays. We want to build DMBC's first purpose-built COVID secure safe office, and to create a design brand that celebrates Dudley's green credentials. The target for the planning will be Christmas 2020, that's an estimate, and we estimate that the build will be completed by winter 2021. In answer to Councillor Ali's question, obviously we will involve members as soon as the designs are ready. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shakespeare. Councillor Zorda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is on page 10. Considering we've been monitoring Netherton's high levels of nitrogen oxide, and everything that suggests in the report that the reasons why the levels have reduced are fortunate opportunities rather than active interventions, other than maybe the bus fleet. What I'd be keen to understand is, what is the plan for reducing an area of pollution which has been recognised in for a number of years as causing some concern for the local community? And also, what is this timescale for monitoring? Because we've been monitoring this for 3 years, and at what point do we stop monitoring and start acting?
Thank you, Councillor Zarda. Councillor Millward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's in relation to Maitland Road Children's Home. I visited this some 3 years ago. I believe I was the cabinet member then at the time. We're now sort of 4 interim directors later. I'm really, grateful and thankful that this work is going to be carried out. And I know that the answers will be given later on with regards to the funding. But my plea, especially to our cabinet member for children's and to the staff, is that when I visited, there was one young person in this place. And, she was a lovely young girl. She showed me a lovely bedroom and how nice the home was at the time. But my biggest criticism at the time was the fact that this was being used as a satellite office for our children's services staff. There was simply, apart from her bedroom, not a single room that was not being utilised by staff coming and going, which in my, honest opinion, did not make for a very warm and friendly home, which is what it is supposed to be. So my plea is that we utilise it purely as a children's home and not as a satellite outworking station for our children's services staff, with virtually every room being full of papers and computers and off limits to the young people that live there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Millward. Councillor Kettle. Councillor Kettle. Councillor Mike Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I relate to the improvements to Wren's Nest and Saltwell's Nature Reserve. At present, we are experiencing as a country very concerning times relating to the coronavirus. So it is extremely important that we improve our outside facilities so that residents can enjoy these facilities in safety. As most members are already aware, the Wren's Nest is one of the greatest geological areas in the world, and it is now extremely important that we continue to promote these facilities around the world. Could I ask the Cabinet member to update the members on all the improvements to these areas? Could I also take this opportunity to thank the Cabinet member and her staff for all the hard work they have put in to improve these areas? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. I'll come back to Councillor Kettle. Councillor Kettle. Okay. Councillor Rida Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question's regarding CCTV control rooms. So the operational duties have now been taken over by Enigma Securities. Now, do they report to the council or with the police, and what will our role be in liaising with Enigma Securities? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Shakespeare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Am I able to respond to the question to Cabinet member?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. Saltwells is a magnificent place. We've been having around about 200,000 visitors annually. And during lockdown, we saw the numbers completely skyrocket. as more and more people came to enjoy our green spaces, which are on the doorstep and maybe they hadn't visited in the past. The work that the wardens do with a wide range of voluntary and community groups and friends and partners is absolutely amazing. And I won't go through the list, but there are a huge number. And obviously, we're particularly proud that Saltwell's got national nature reserve status, and that will be officially granted on the 24th of October, and is primarily for the site's carboniferous geology. And obviously, there's lots of other things that we have to offer here at Saltwells, particularly the bluebells, and that's of a great attraction. I think Dudley Place hosts to many of the principal sites for the UNESCO Geopark, and these being our fantastic nature reserves, which have been mentioned. And we have two, which Wren's Nest and Saltwells are now sites. So most of our nature reserves have some geological interest within them. That includes Cotwell End and Barrow Hill. Local nature reserves, for example, they also are sites of interest for geological interest, and there's many other smaller sites which also fall under the management of Dudley Countryside Service, which are also important for their geology, notably our proposed new LNRs in Stourbridge. Our volunteers, which I have to thank so much, they deliver something like almost 14,000 volunteer hours each year. Saltwells, 5,000 hours of volunteering, and we can never thank them enough for their support for our nature reserves and our green open spaces. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shakespeare. Councillor Laura Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick response to Councillor Ahmed. The contract for the CCTV control room is with us, as was the previous contract with OCS. All the staff, as you can see, have been chipied over, so it is all for us. So they report to us, and the police work with us as they did for the previous contract.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'll call upon the leader to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll respond in the order that the questions were asked. Firstly, on Maitland Road, to Councillors Finch and Ridney. The repair and refurbishment of Maitland Road is being funded from the 14 to 19 Diploma, SEN and Disabilities Capital Grant. This is a single grant which the Council received over 10 years ago, and there is still 60k left to be allocated. There were no prescriptive conditions attached to the funding from DFE. I'll repeat that, Mr. Mayor, because that's important. There were no prescriptive conditions attached to the funding from DFE, only that the expenditure should be capital in nature. There's also a separate provision capital grant referred to as SEND Capital, which is not being used to fund Maitland Road. Now, I can get a more fuller extract of the guidance to both members who have asked that question. However, I find it staggering that this council has received the grant. This administration is making full use of that particular grant because there are no strings attached, and we're bringing a dilapidated, unfit building back in to good use, which is fit for the 21st century. And that grant would have been given to the authority, and we would have had successive Labour Children's Services Cabinet members who did very little with that grant and left more than 60,000 to gather interest and the building to rot and fall into disrepair. We're putting that right, Mr. Mayor. Reference Councillor Ali, Mr. Mayor. I think that Councillor Shakespeare answered him quite fully, but I'm sure that if he wants, he can have a more fuller written update at a later date. Reference Councillor Baton. The interchange is the #1 project of Travel West Midlands and also the combined authority. So in answer to the question, will it get funded? Undoubtedly, yes, it will. And this administration, this Conservative administration, has a great track record on getting key projects funded. I'll just say 3 letters, Mr. Mayor. VLR, fully funded. Big question asked of the government. Government came up trumps and provided the funding. And we'll get that funding for the interchange too, Mr. Mayor. Reference Councillor Ahmad. Sure we can get a written answer there because that's quite detailed. Councillor Zada, you know, one way we will tackle pollution is by replacing buses, which are by far the biggest polluters because they are stopping and starting constantly. Now, with the new arrangements and the new plans for new fleets of buses, which make them cleaner, greener, more environmentally friendly, I know, being involved with the Combined Authority, that Dudley is at the forefront of that new delivery of greener and more environmentally friendlier buses. So that's one, I think, one quite large measure where, you know, Councillor Zada's ward can benefit from new bus fleet, but there's much more to do. And unfortunately, some of the measures that we wanted to put in place because of COVID, unfortunately, just weren't supported by ward members. And Councillor Mike Evans, thank Councillor Evans for his kind words. Absolutely right. You know, this stems back to getting a nature reserve for Warden's Den for salt wells. We said we would deliver one for salt wells. It's been delivered. As the report indicates, great progress made there. But we also are delivering on Wren's Nest, which I particularly think is the jewel in the crown of our nature reserves. As a young lad that played there for many years, it is absolutely brilliant that the dilapidated building on Wren's Nest will also be replaced. And like salt wells, we can have a Warden's Den that the whole borough can indeed be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Does Council agree? That is carried.
Aye.
Aye.
No dissent. That is carried. Review of the licensing policy. I call upon Councillor Karen Shakespeare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the Council, I move the review of the licensing policy. The review is required by law every 5 years, and the current policy was adopted in 2015 and remains in place until the Council adopts this new review. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions?
There are no hands showing as yet, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions?
No, there's nothing showing.
The Council agree?
Aye.
Aye. That is carried. Appointment of Director of Public Health and Wellbeing. I call upon the Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've lost where I am. Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the Council, I move that the recommendations of the Appointments Committee be approved and adopted. Thank you.
Call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion. Yep. Councillor Vickers.
He was on mute.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I formally seconded it earlier.
Sorry about that. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I hope that you can permit me by coming in at this particular point. I welcome Karen to this authority, but can I take this opportunity, Mr. Mayor, to offer my heartfelt thanks to the Acting Director of Public Health, Val Core, and also to all colleagues within the Public Health Department for everything that they are doing and continue to do to keep us safe and have one of the lowest figures in the West Midlands region. But certainly I wish to put on record my thanks to Balcor for everything that she has done while she's been in that acting up role. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, members. Thank you.
There are no other indications to speak, Mr. Mayor.
So there's no need for the council for the leader to reply. Does the council agree?
Aye.
Aye.
That's carried.
Agreed.
Treasury Management, I call upon Councillor Alan Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I move that the report of the Audit and Standards Committee be received and noted.
I call upon Councillor Joe Roberts to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Khurshid Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's page 23, paragraph 8. It says the average value of long-term borrowing in 2019/20 is 618.8 million. My question to the chair is, how does this compare to the borrowing in the previous 5 years? And can the chair assure all the members that the external borrowings are affordable, prudent and sustainable given the current circumstances?
Yeah,
Councillor Ahmed. Any further questions? No further questions. I'll call upon Councillor Alan Taylor to reply.
yeah, our borrowing doesn't vary too much, but I will get him the exact figures over the last few years so that he can compare them. And our prudent borrowing is always within the limits set, apart from in one instance, the West Midlands one did go over for a short time. Apart from that, our prudence borrowing is always within limits. But I will get you a full answer to the amount we've borrowed over the last few years. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Does Council agree?
Aye.
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 That is carried. Notices of motion. Following the consultation with the group leaders, it has been agreed that all the notices of motion previously submitted are deferred for further consideration. I now move on to questions from members under Council Procedure Rule 11. The purpose of this session is for members to ask questions. There will be a 1 hour time limit on the question time session. The time limit on all individual contributions during the session will be 2 minutes. All questions will be dealt with individually, one at a time. If time permits, members may indicate to ask another question during the session. When I call upon members to ask a supplementary question, this must relate to the original question or the answer given. Don't move on to written. I'll call upon Councillor Jackie Cowell to ask a question she has given written notice for. Councillor Cowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I ask the Cabinet Member for Housing and Community Services, what action is the Council taking to address the health implications of visits from housing maintenance staff and subcontractors to clinically vulnerable tenants across the borough? Specifically, what protocols are in place? How many times have operatives been refused entry for failing to respond to requests to wear PPE? And how many complaints have been received in relation to COVID compliance since March? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell. Call upon Councillor Laura Taylor to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Cowell, for your question. We have got robust procedures in place, which is there to protect both the tenants and our contractors and our operatives. So no cold calling is permitted, and any tenants need to be contacted before any appointments to establish whether there are any health vulnerabilities or anybody shielding in the property. All non-essential works in households where there are shielders have been deferred, and they'll be done at a later date. Obviously, there are some works that are an emergency or are statutory in their very nature. These have to be done regardless of whether there are shielders. These are obviously for the tenant's own good. So these could be gas checks or electricity checks. Where they are necessary, there are protocols in place which include securing the area, making sure PPE is worn in line with the right regulations, and making sure that areas are sterilised after the work has been done. The repair teams have operated a reduced service during the pandemic, but still there has been quite a high number of repairs that have taken place. We've only received 5 complaints on file that haven't been upheld. A lot of this was around the use of PPE, but it was found that in all of these instances, the operatives in question were working within the appropriate guidelines. I think when we're looking at these figures, it's also important to consider both sides of the coin. Our contractors and operatives must be protected as well. So for that, operatives must ask at the door if there are any tenants or anybody inside the property that are showing symptoms. We've actually had 32 incidences where our operatives have had to leave the property without undertaking the works because people are showing symptoms. So obviously, I'm pleased that the operatives have left because obviously that protects them. I have got all of the very specific statistics and details on the policies. So I've asked for these to be sent directly to you, Councillor Cowell, so you can have a full look through these, which have got all the full policy documents as well, so you can have those details. I'd also like to put on the record my thanks to the housing teams. They've all worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic. And specifically in relation to this question, those in housing maintenance, they've provided a really good quality service in the most stressful and uncertain times. So I would like it on the record, my thanks to them. And
Councillor,
as I said,
Councillor Taylor, I must interrupt. It's a 2-minute ruling.
oh, apologies, I didn't know. I'll get the details over to Jackie after the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Cowell, have you got a supplementary question?
Yes, just briefly. First of all, thanks, Councillor Taylor, for that information. But I do think we need to discuss further at some point, because I do have evidence that unfortunately not all teams are wearing PPE. And as you do say, it's not just the residents. In some cases, it could also be the operatives themselves that are at risk. So I do think that needs to be looked in further, and perhaps we can discuss this in a different format at a later date. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell. I call upon Councillor Laura Taylor to reply to the supplementary question.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell. Obviously, any information around this I would welcome to look into properly. If it isn't brought to our attention, we can't provide any answers or any details. So I would very much welcome that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I call upon Councillor Mohammed Hanif to ask his question. Councillor Hanif.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to the Cabinet Member for Public Realm, Councillor Karen Shakespeare. Having received an email from Highways recently relating to the cycle parking stands being installed in many of our wards, can she tell me when were the local ward councillors consulted on their locations, and if not, why not?
I'll call upon Councillor Karen Shakespeare to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that question. Officers have attempted to identify feasible, safe and usable locations for additional cycle parking facilities in our towns, district and local centres, together with parks and open spaces across the borough. Given the time constraints associated with the funding, which was tranche 1 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund, this had to be done very quickly to understand numbers and costs, which unfortunately didn't allow time for full consultation at that stage. However, as Councillor Hanif has pointed out, last Tuesday, I actually had an email sent round to all ward members with all the proposed locations on the basis that if either they have any concerns about the particular site or indeed are aware of any other additional suitable locations, then these can be fed back and assessed accordingly. And we do have time for that now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shakespeare. Does Councillor Neef wish to ask a supplementary question?
No, Mr. Mayor, I think that's been very successfully answered. Thank you.
No further written questions have been submitted in advance, so I'll now move over to the verbal questions, which can be asked to the leader, cabinet members and chairs of committees. Can members now indicate if they have any questions for the leader, cabinet members or chairs? And I see that we've already got 3 through, haven't we? You first of all, Councillor Greenaway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to ask a question of the leader of the council. If it's Conservative group policy to build on brownfield sites first, how did the controversial green spaces get into the plan in the first place?
Thank you, Councillor Greenaway. Do I get the leader to respond? Councillor Harley, would you like to respond to that, please?
I certainly would, Mr. Yeah, I certainly would, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I can confirm to Councillor Greenaway that it is the policy of this administration to always look at brownfield first, and reference her question about why sites are offered up. Those are the rules and regulations. All sites have to be offered up to begin with, and then we begin then the very complicated and long-winded consultation to try and then whittle those sites down to what are acceptable, both in terms of what we consider that we actually need, and in my view, and it's the view shared by many members of Parliament, including Mike Wood and Mark O'Longy from Dudley North and South, and it's a view shared by Andy Street that Dudley has sufficient brownfield sites to keep us going for a good many years yet. So to keep it brief because of the 2-minute ruling, Mr. Mayor, yes, Councillor Greenway is right. We operate a brownfield first policy, and yes, in answer to a second question, will that green belt be safe with the Conservatives? You bet it will.
Thank you, Leader. I'll call upon Councillor Greenaway if there's any supplementary question.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Call upon Councillor Judith Foster. Judy Foster, I do beg your pardon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to a question that I asked at full council last time, so I believe it's one for the leader to respond to. I've only just had a response back from my written question forwarded to me in the last few days, so I wasn't able to make this a written question. But I wanted to know about the progress with resuming face-to-face community forum meetings. The response I've had from Public Health suggests that they won't resume until January 2021, but this response was sent to me having been written in August, and I think that we're probably even further away from face-to-face meetings. So can I ask the leader what consideration will be given to alternative means of getting people and councillors face-to-face, such as what we are doing now with Microsoft Teams and other means, which are already being considered by other departments within the council for other purposes? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Harley to reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't understand Councillor Foster's obsession with resuming the community forums. If there are community groups that require funding, which is the key part of these community forums, then quite rightly they can still access funding but by completing the online process. And I'm sure that the relevant officers will then email and do a round robin of emails for approval or not from the members that are assigned to that particular community forum. We're now about to enter another stage in this fight against COVID, and I think it's really inappropriate to be asking elected members, the public and officers, when I'm told that a large number of officers have reportedly gone down with the infection in the last week or so, to the point where I have to consider closing the council house in its entirety later this week, and other council accommodation. I think it's inappropriate at this moment in time to be spending time on whether we get people to meet up again or whether we do community forums by another means. There are plenty of ways in which elected members can still keep in touch with their constituents. They can do meetings themselves, such as this. It's quite easy to set up. My own Conservative association, and I know Dudley North's association, yours, Mr. Mayor, has regular meetings through Teams or Zoom. So it is possible for elected members to keep in touch through both these means, both these vehicles, but without having to meet up physically. And if Councillor Foster's that desperate to meet up with the constituents, then I would suggest that she does this type of exercise and let the council officers and the excellent team that we've had get on with trying to keep Dudley's numbers as low as what they are now. Because at the moment, Dudley is doing his absolute damnedest to keep those numbers low, and what we don't need is distractions such as the one that Councillor Foster's mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Councillor Foster, do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, a rather rude outburst from the leader, actually, because I never suggested face-to-face in-person meetings. I asked the leader whether or not there's any consideration of remote virtual meetings as such as what we are doing now. I mean, I can't comment on Conservative-led community forums, but in Brierley Hill and Brockmore, we do rather more than just grant funds. We provide presentations to people. People come along to hear about updates on various projects like the Metro Mayor and other matters. It's not beyond the wit of the council to arrange Teams meetings for community forums as they do for other council meetings. So I think that the leader of the council should in future actually listen to the question that I'm asking him.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Harley, would you like to reply?
Not really, Mr. Mayor. I've said what I said before. There are no plans at the moment. We have more important things to be getting on with, which is trying to contain this virus to relatively low numbers across the borough.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. I call upon Councillor Peter Lee. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, can you see me?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, well, that's probably a good thing, Mr. Mayor.
I can now, so you're okay.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, well, really, it's about the drug problem in our borough. You're probably aware, Mr. Mayor, that I am a foster carer for the borough, and I've recently had quite a shocking sort of experience with one of our children, and I'm absolutely shocked by the amount of young children, 13, 12 years old, walking about at wads of money in the hands, which I've experienced personally, saying, you think drug taking's a bad thing, and waving wads of money right in my face. It's a particular worry to me because we foster children, and our children are very vulnerable. And I'm just wondering if it would be possible for the council administration to send letters to all of our schools. I'm very sure they're aware of drug problems in our borough, but I don't think they're aware of the drug problem in our borough. It's absolutely rife. I mean, we've recently witnessed fatal shootings, and I'm particularly worried about the targeting our young children. I'm absolutely particularly worried about that. And I just think collectively as councillors, we need to be made aware of this problem in our borough. And you can bet your life it's happening in all of the boroughs and probably the adjoining boroughs as well.
Councillor Lee, I have to interrupt, but your 2 minutes have expired. Would you
Okay.
like me to call upon the leader to respond to you now?
Yes,
Councillor
please.
Raleigh.
Yes, please, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank Councillor Peter Lee for his question. No, I'm absolutely sure he's outraged and disgust at the situation we find ourselves. It's a sad indictment of the society we live in now with the problems with drugs, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And we see evidence now every single day, whereas years ago it would have been rare to see this type of activity. Unfortunately, it's far too recurrent these days. What we can do is, write to the PCC. I believe that there's been a failure over the last 4 or 5 years of a Labour PCC that spent more on refurbishing offices at Lloyd House than they have actually dealing with this scourge, this modern scourge of drugs. And it's a scourge that we have to tackle and we have to win, because this is a whole young generation of kids who, when we were kids, we thought that the sort of drugs you're talking about were for the rich and famous. Well, they're not. They're for children on our housing estates, in our communities. And we have to do more, and we have to find the resource to do that. And unfortunately, this PCC has that resource. It's just that he's directed it elsewhere.
Thank you, Councillor Raleigh. Supplementary question, Councillor Lee.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm just happy that everybody's aware of it, to make people aware of it. And the shocking result, because there's a drug out there called Mamba at the moment. It's been there for a while, actually, and I believe it's widely used in the prisons. But young children are taking this drug, Mr. Mayor. It's absolutely shocking, the effect, and it's very, very addictive very quickly. Within weeks, you can be addicted to this drug, and they're targeting our young people. So that's my concern. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Thank you.
Councillor Ridney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for Councillor Laura Taylor, referring to decision number 11 in the White Book, which is about moving residents from Jack Newell Court and Woodhouse Court for refurbishment. I'd just like to know, due to the present circumstances with COVID, etc., what timeline we're still on with this project. I haven't had an update in recent weeks. I was being kept quite well informed, but I haven't had one in recent weeks. So I would really like to know where we are with this. Are we still on course to get completion, or does it look like it will be behind? I'd just like to know from Councillor Taylor where we are with this project.
Thank you, Councillor Ridney. Councillor Laura Taylor, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the question, Sue. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any delays, and I'm sorry that you haven't had a recent update. So I'll make sure that you get that, and we can have a chat about how it's all going, and just to make sure that it is all on schedule, and just make sure that you are kept in the loop going forward.
Councillor Ridney, have you got any supplementary question?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
There are no further indications, Mr. Mayor.
There's no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chief Exec. As there is no further questions, so that completes the question time agenda item. I would like to make a few comments myself, if I may. I must have out to the Mayor's announcement for a special reason. I'd like to give some special thanks to Councillor Neef and to Councillor Walthow. And also to one of our officers, Councillor, I do beg your pardon, one of our officers, Mr. Butcher. The four of us completed the Dudley trial last week, I think we did sort of 13, 14 miles. And it was, as been said in the meeting, a pleasure to do it, to see such wonderful amenities we have in our borough. We spent some time on the canal system and also around the Saltwells Nature Reserve. So I'd like to give my special thanks to Councillor Neve, Councillor Walthow, and also to Mr. Butcher. I'm appealing at this stage, Mr. Chief Executive, to be perfectly truthful, for any members who would like to make a contribution to the Mayor's charity. Having the four of us completed this task, and money has started to come in, but tonight is a special appeal to get a little bit more in. It is very difficult with the Mayor's charity, with really little events, me to be out there meeting people and doing the job as I've been used to. So any people that would like to make contributions, and this is not really combined to the members of the council, but for any members of the general public listen to this session, if they'd like to contribute, any contributions would be more than gratefully received. I've got an hand up from Councillor Millward, and I'm prepared to accept that, Councillor Millward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was actually to remind you to tell people about your wonderful endeavour last week, and just to let you know that we've had a whip round in our street, and we've raised just over £100. Now, obviously, with the COVID situation, I'm not going to the bank, so I'm not going to be doing the transfer because I'd have to go and put the money in. So you're going to have it shoved through your door in a brown envelope. Sorry, but well done, Councillor Stanley. Well done.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Millward. As there is no urgent business, that concludes the meeting of this council. Can I thank each and every one of you for your patience with me in particular with conducting this meeting, and I wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Bye.
Cheers,